Recording, Mata. Hello. Hello, everybody. Just playing with the computer here. My name is Barry Bostain. Most of you, I think, know me. You've had me for the last few quarters. It's been quite enjoyable teaching at School of the East. And welcome my new students. Hopefully we have a good journey here with our first YouTube/computer classes due to the corona. And then hopefully shortly we'll be back in a classroom session. But for now, hopefully we can enjoy this. As you can see the background here, I am teaching this class from Jeju-do, Korea. I'm in Jeju-do. And if you believe me, I can sell you some swampland for a cheap price. Okay? So normally at this time in my class, I would ask my students, do you know the name of the class you're in? So a lot of times they don't know. So I have to go over this. This class right now I'm recording this for is Humanities, or HUM 101 is the course code. The class name is Civilization of the East. And again, my name is Barry Bostain. So hopefully I can make this class enjoyable for you. I will stay away from the usual thing that terrifies students, which will be giving you a lot of dates for you to remember. This happened in 1843. This happened in 1910. No, none of that. I'm going to keep the dates to a minimum and concentrate on knowledge, okay, and easy to remember knowledge. So hopefully you enjoy it. You like the book that I chose, and I can make the stories interesting for you. You can remember them even better than a high school American student that has forgot a lot of their history knowledge and is terrified of remembering certain dates, okay? So, again, let me start with this in the first reading. I've made a PowerPoint so I can minimize my face, put it up in the corner so you don't get bored looking at my face all day. Okay. So now we're in the PowerPoint, so you can concentrate on this and follow along as I read it. Hopefully make it interesting for you. Okay, so I'm going to begin right now. Thank you. The title is of this first chapter we're getting into here is Early Tsarist Russia, 1380 to 1613. If you don't know what a czar is, it is a Russian word for king or monarch, right? So we're talking about the early kings of Russia. So here in 1380, the nation we know today as Russia was a small collection of principalities, Muscovy, Novgorod, and others, paying tribute to the Tartars. Okay. So what this means is that it was not yet known as Russia. It was not an entity or country that we know of today. It was a collection of different principalities or states. It says here they paid tribute to Tartars. Okay. Paying tribute means giving money to them to let them live in peace, possibly give them some supplies, but basically for peace. And Tartars were a group of people that are distantly related to Mongols. If you look at your geography, Russia and China, and between Russia and China is the country of Mongolia. So the Tartars were quite powerful at this time and controlled the principalities that later united and became the Russia that we know today. So here you see by 1600, that's a long time, from 1380. It had become an empire under Russian rule and had expanded its borders far beyond its original size. So if you look at that, that's about 220 years it took for it to become an empire in what is known as Russia today. It was to grow larger over the next century Eventually encompassing, or that means becoming in size, 1/6 of all the land on Earth. Yes, Russia is a huge country. It is larger than the United States. The major goals of the early Russian princes and czars, again, kings, were fourfold. First, they wanted to break away from the stranglehold of Tatar authority. Again, as I stated earlier, they had to pay them for peace. So they wanted to get away from that and have their own independence. Second, they wanted to consolidate power into the hands of one absolute monarch with a capital city as a central power base. Okay? Consolidate means to bring things together and make only one. I can tell you now, everybody here, all you students that live in Los Angeles, it's very common. You see Bank of Americas everywhere, but I'll tell you, about 20 years ago, there was a lot of other different banks. Bank of America bought a lot of these smaller banks, and their names disappeared, and they consolidated the power of these banks into Bank of America. So here they wanted to do that, but the principalities, absolute monarchs, so one and only king. And they wanted a capital city as a central power base. As I said before, they were not a country as we know today, and just various different states held together. So once they become a full country, they needed a capital city, just like any other country. Third, they wanted the central government to consolidate and control all the elements of society, from the boyars, hereditary nobles, that's something you don't have to remember, through the peasants being the poorest of the poor, people that probably didn't own any land, maybe had a home, no education, but were surviving and struggling day to day. Last, they wanted to expand an empire to both the west and the east for strategic and trade purposes. So usually when countries talk about strategic, it means strategies and forms of protection. If they extend their border to a certain area, then they feel they're more protected of their country. If they're not, if the borders are closer in, they feel kind of defenseless and powerless. And then trade purposes, right? The farther you expand, the closer you are to other countries, and trade becomes easier, especially at that time. There were no planes, no motor vehicles. People just went on horses and carriages. So trade was not an easy thing to do at the time. Continuing, although present-day Russia has one foot in Asia, this was not the case in its early history. Historically and culturally, it is an Eastern European nation with its roots in the western portion of the country, the area bordering Poland and Scandinavia. Russians are Slavic people like most Europeans. European countries would be like Bulgaria, Latvia, Estonia. Those are some European countries. Continuing, Russian is written in the Cyrillic alphabet, not the Roman one used throughout the West. We use a Roman alphabet here in the United States, England, but they use a Cyrillic alphabet. To Western people, it looks like you're writing backwards. That's how it looks to us. So remember that. That might come up on the midterm, right? That kind of question. Therefore, the student may find variations in both primary and secondary sources in the English transliterations of Russian proper names and other Russian words. For example, both Tsar and Tsar are acceptable Western spellings of the Russian emperor's title. So they're both acceptable, and people will not argue over that. The only example I can give you is in my travels and dealing with my Korean students. I've found that Busan spelled with a B and Busan spelled with a P are both acceptable. And people don't usually argue if someone says Busan or Busan. So it's the same thing here with the Russian writing and the translations. You can have CZAR or TSAR. They are acceptable. Or if you're talking about the West Coast here and the East Coast in the United States, once you go beyond Texas, HEBR, people say herb, things that you put in your food. If you come west from Texas, California, we always say herb. We do not pronounce the H. But if I hear someone from the East Coast say herb and they pronounce the H, it's no problem. It's widely acceptable. Okay. And at the bottom here, in addition, Russian names are sometimes anglicized. For example, Piotr becomes Peter, and Yekaterina becomes Catherine. So again, you see the true Russian name of Piotr and Yekaterina, but those are not English variations. So we have to change them to Peter and Catherine. Okay. Now, what I'm going to read next on 28 here, it says Chapter 3 objectives. Okay. These are just kind of a guideline. There's really nothing here you'd have to worry about in answering any of my questions or worrying about knowing or remembering for the midterm, but they're just guideposts for you to look at, think about a bit. Okay, so some objectives here, Chapter 3. Identify the early principalities on a map. Now, it's there in the reading, I just said it, but I'm not going to give you a map and force you to put these things there, right? Okay, next, trace the progress of Russian expansion under the early princes and czars. Well, you will know the line, but you don't have to be able to trace it. Okay, compare and contrast government in Russia with the government at the same period in Western Europe. Again, that's just something for your own knowledge. You'll learn about who Russia tried to mold themselves after, whether it's France or ancient Rome, and you'll learn those things and you'll just remember, but specifics don't have to worry about. Describe the major turning points in Russian history between 1380 and 1613. So again, I mentioned what makes students upset about history is remembering dates. If I ask you something like that, I will supply the date for you. So you don't have to remember. I just might say, what happened in 1380? So you just have to remember the event. Okay. Going towards the bottom here, Chapter 3, timeline. 1380, Moscow defeats Tartars in the Battle of Kulikovo. Muscovite expansion begins. So that's basically telling you they're going to have a war with the Tartars, who they've been paying money to for peace, and the Muscovite expansion begins. So that must mean Russia won, right? Or the beginnings of the Russian Empire. 1453, the fall of Constantinople to Ottoman Turks. You really don't have to worry about that. Constantinople at the time was considered the second Rome. And you'll see a connection under a future king or czar of Russia. But again, they're just for you to have as a tidbits of knowledge. 1469, Ivan III marries Zoe, niece of Emperor of Byzantium. Okay, again, I'm not going to ask you who Ivan III married. I can give you an example. If I ask my Korean students who invented Korean writing, everybody quickly says King Sejong. But then when I ask them what is the name of King Sejong's wife, they all just go, Huh? So I'm not going to ask you about Ivan III and who he married, Britney Spears or Zoe, right? Next, 1480, end of Tatar authority in Russia. Okay, linking back to a war that they had with what became Russia. Obviously, they became victorious. 1547, Ivan IV. So you see, we have a succession here: Ivan III and Ivan IV. That's probably his son, right? Is crowned Czar of all the Russias. So you see, Russia has grown at this time to be quite large. So large, many different contingents, meaning all the Russias. 1598 to 1613, time of troubles. We'll get into that. Sounds pretty bad, right? Time of troubles, but we'll learn exactly what that means later. And finally, here on this page, Mikhail Romanov becomes new Tsar in 1613. Dynasty will continue until 1917. So if you know your history, if you were in my class, I would ask you, the Romanovs were the last king family. Here you see the line started in 1613. And who had the Romanovs killed, and then who took over at that time, and what type of government was it? And hopefully somebody would have the answer in class. If not, then I'd have to tell you it was Lenin who had the Romanovs killed, the last Nicholas. And he brought communism to Russia. That was in 1917. So hopefully everybody's hanging in there. And I'm going to go to the next page. Okay. The Grand Principality of Muscovy. Okay, the Principality of Muscovy, with the city of Moscow at its center, became the core of the Russian Empire through a combination of geographical and political factors. Just don't try to pay attention to the political. The geography is going to be an important point later, and I usually ask a question about that, a mystery question, but it's pretty basic and pretty self-understanding, so you can do it. It's not difficult. Geography. See, here we go. Muscovy, again, one of the principalities, had no natural borders to define it, nor any geographical features such as mountain ranges to protect it from invasion. Again, that's why I mentioned earlier about expanding its borders, because this area, this minimal area, there was nothing to protect it. So this explains its conquering mentality. Conquering means taking over another people. Moscow could maintain its position of power only by remaining constantly on the attack. That's what they believed. Successful attacks gave the rulers of Muscovy control over major rivers. So here we see with the geography again, they were essential for transportation and trade. So they did send goods over the river. Conquering more territory also enriched. Enrich again makes richer, makes you more power. The royal treasury, because it meant a larger population paying tax to the crown. Right? So more taxes. The more area you have, the more people you control, the more taxes that can be paid. In addition, Moscow was unifying Russia by consolidating, there's that word again, all coming together under one, consolidating power into the hands of one prince. Okay. Again, we hanging in there? We doing okay? Good. Let's go to the next page. Okay. So, Moscow's ruling party, the Danilovich, was abler and more shrewd than ruling families of the other principalities. Again, abler is to be able to do something, more power to do something. Shrewd means very sneaky, very planning, calculating. So he was sneakier than the other ruling families of the principalities. As part of their policy of achieving a greater position of power in Russia, they arranged several important dynastic marriages to create alliances between Muscovy and the other principalities. Family connections like territorial annexation helped to unify the various states into one empire. Okay, now what that means is family alliances and to make connections stronger between different dynasties within Russia. They married off their daughters to the princes. So if your daughter's married to a prince in another principality, you're probably not going to try to fight with them because your daughter's married there and they're going to have children. So it's a bonding, a connecting. So you see here again, family connections like territorial annexation, which just means they take over the territory, help to unify the various states into one empire. You have different states, and your daughter's married to a prince, let's say in 4 different states. Well, you're pretty strong there. It's like making a family. The Orthodox faith also served as a unifying force in the creation of the Russian Empire. This is another strong element here. As Muscovy expanded far beyond its borders into sparsely means very little. So very little inhabited territory. So a lot of land, very few people. A shared form of worship helped to establish a sense of community and belonging. So the religion brought these small in population, but varied groups of people together. The Orthodox Church supported political unity among the principalities of Russia because a strong central rule meant greater control over the people, and meaning all of the people. Orthodox leaders saw political control as a useful supplement to religious control. So they worked hand in hand, the political control and the religious control. By the 1400s, the metropolitan head of the Orthodox Church in Russia, analogous, meaning the same position, to the Archbishop of Canterbury in England. So unless you're a big Catholic individual, you'll know what I'm talking about. Not important for my test. Had accepted Moscow as the center of the empire. Now, since this is a new project that I've gotten into, I jumped ahead of myself a little bit here. So we have to answer questions. I have to test your reading comprehension. So I've jumped ahead here a little. So let me make sure I give you the past pages questions, okay? So I'm going to move and write these things down. What is called whiteboard. Okay. So this would be the first page, the early Tsarist Russia. There's some questions there I need to ask you, which is actually page 27. So let me write these questions for you. Okay, so my first question here is, when did Russia become an empire? Again, remember, we know that they were three different principalities. They were not a unified country yet. So I'm asking you, when did they become an empire? Okay, question 2. Okay, question 2. What were the new Russian Empire's major goals? I'll give you a hint here. There's 4 of them. So you're going to have to look up in your homework 4. If this comes on the test and a student only writes 1 or 2, that's fine, but they will not get as many points as a student who writes all 4 or at least 3. So they're not difficult to remember. So just keep that in mind. A lot of students will see this and they'll just put 1, and they don't understand why they got less points than someone else. So my only hint there is that there are 4 major goals. And it's pretty much common sense. Every country is kind of the same. You have to establish these things to establish yourself as a country. Okay, so I'm on to question 3, which is the last question for page 27, or the first page that we read. Okay. So question 3, how is the Russian language written? So again, we write in a different style in English, and the Russians write in a different style in Russian. So I want you to supply me the name of this kind of writing. A hint is, if I asked you, Japanese, for example, how do they write? Okay, hiragana or hiragana. So there's a name for the Russian language written the way you write it. So hopefully you remember it. It's not long. I'll give you a few minutes to copy these questions. I don't want students getting angry and say, oh, he erased it so soon. I only wrote question 1, teacher's bad. Oh, terrible. So if you're still on your Candy Crush, please get off your Candy Crush. Just write these questions so you have them. You can answer them later, right? So again, I'm giving you time. I don't want to have students angry that he wrote and he erased it, so I don't know what to do. Oh my gosh. So giving you some time. Again, number 1, when did Russia become an empire? Probably one of the very few questions I'm going to ask you for a number. There's another hint for you, a date. 2, what were the new Russian Empire's major goals? Again, there were 4. Hopefully 4 is not too much for you, but less than what you thought. And 3, how is the Russian language written? Which kind of script is it written in? Okay. All right, so I'm going to start erasing, hopefully slowly. Again, make sure you have these written down. So here we go. Start with the first one. And Erase that. Oh, that was fast. Okay, here's 2. 1, 2, buckle my shoe. Oh, I did 3 first, sorry. And then 2. Okay? Okay. You don't need me there, so got to go to the readings. Okay? All right. So we are now at the middle bottom of the page. This would be page 29. Russian society and government. The Tartars from the Asian lands we now refer to as Mongolia. Look at that. Invaded and conquered most of Russia. So their descendants, and now the Mongolians, under Genghis Khan in the 1200s. Okay, so all my Mongolian students will know that, right? Temujin. So under Tartar rule, the Russian princes had to pay annual tributes to the Khan, meaning Genghis Khan in this case, but were more or less left to the details of governing on their own. So I guess Mongolians didn't help too much with the governing. They just wanted the money. Once the Tatars were overthrown and Moscow became the center of Russia, the Russian Empire was an absolute monarch. Okay, far from an autocrat than any Western European ruler at this period, which means he had complete power. He didn't necessarily listen to his advisors. Just had the complete power to do exactly what he wanted to do. So kind of like Kim Jong-un today, right? And we know what happens to Kim Jong-un's advisors that give him bad information, right? Okay. So as I said, the emperor had advisors, usually drawn from the boyars, again, hereditary nobles meaning family lines in the royal family. And the upper clergy meaning the church, meaning the highest level of the church, the most highest priests. But these men had no power or privileges other than what the emperor chose to grant them. So again, no power, no privilege. If he didn't want to listen to them, they could just shut up. It didn't matter. Again, like today, if you want to compare today, a lot of people don't like President Trump. But President Trump cannot just declare war on a country, right? He's not an absolute monarch. He has to ask the Senate, can I attack this country? Can I do this? Can I respond? And they will give him the power. So it's a check and balance. The Russian emperor or Kim Jong-un, nothing of the sense. They can do whatever they wanted. So finishing at the bottom, nor did the Russian government have any form of popular representation, which means the people. People said, we don't like this, or we need this, or that's not a good idea. No, the king or the czar had the complete power. So that's why it ends off here. The emperor truly was the state, or truly was the government. Everything was under his rule. Okay, so we've just finished 29, so I'm going to have to write the questions for 29. 28, there were no questions. Those were just objectives and a guideline. So you missed questions there. Yay! Best for you to do. Okay, again, let me go to here, whiteboard. Let me start writing these questions. So the first question is, who was Moscow's first ruling family? So once Russia became an empire, And Moscow was made the capital city. Who was the first ruling family? So just supply me with the last name, and that will be enough. Okay, that's all I'm asking for. Okay, question 5. Okay, so this question, what also played a unifying force, or something that brings the people together in the creation of the Russian Empire? So it was not only the Tsar, but there was another force that helped unify people under his rule in the Russian Empire. And again, in the course of history, it's happened in most countries this way. So that's a common sense question for you. Don't worry. Next question. Okay. Put the number here. Oh, I wiped my thing out. Okay. I'll put it back up there. Don't worry. I'm just trying to put a 6 there. Gives you more time to write 4 and 5. I'm just trying to put a 6. Just trying to put a 6. Okay, that doesn't look good. Okay, I'll fix it, don't worry. Okay, so I guess I'll pick another method here. I'll just write it again. I'll make sure I'll put a 6 first. There we go, number 6. Okay, who did the Russians have to overthrow to become an empire? I talked about that a number of times. So they had an enemy, and they had to defeat this enemy to become their own independent country. If you were in my class or we were face to face, I'd ask you, who did the United States have to defeat to become a country? They were not the United States before. They were separate colonies that belonged to a European power. So hopefully you would know the answer and say, oh, the US had to beat the British, right? They were our enemies. They were ruling us, okay? So I'm gonna move on to the last question on page 29. Number 7. This is like you'll probably want me to put this on the midterm. This is like a free points question. So if you can't answer this one, I'd be very sad. Okay. I cannot give you hints here. It's too easy. Which area became the center of Russia? Please don't put K-Town or Hollywood, okay? But this has been mentioned quite a lot through the reading, so I cannot give you any type of hints here. So again, at this point, I will give you some time because there's 4 questions on this page instead of 3, and some people write slower than others. So I'll tell you, like my father used to tell me, take all the time you want, you just better hurry up. So, you know, write these 4 questions. I'll go over them again. Who was Moscow's first ruling family? Give me the name, only the last name. 5, what also played a unifying force in the creation of the Russian Empire? So besides the government, there was something else, another very strong force that unified people. And again, throughout history, most countries, this was the case. 6, who did the Russians have to overthrow to become an empire? So who was their big number 1 enemy? So don't say something like, oh, it was Mexico, right? Or it was Canada. That's not quite the case. They're not located anywhere near Russia. And the last one for page 29, which area became the center of Russia? Again, I'm thinking about giving you a hint, but I'm not. We'll just make it too easy. Again, it's been mentioned many, many times. Okay, I'm going to go to the eraser now, and hopefully everybody's written these questions. Again, you can write your answers later. There goes 4. Okay. There goes 5. There goes 6. The piece de resistance. There goes 7. Okay. So I'm going to go back. Okay. Go to the reading. And then we finish Russian society and government. So I have to go to the next page. Okay. So I don't want to lose my spot here. I want to make sure I end at the correct time so that I give you guys the questions when you need them. I don't want to overshoot. I kind of did that in the first page. Sorry about that, but I've corrected that now. Okay, let's get into some more of this early Russian history here. It's quite interesting. The Russian climate, which again is weather conditions, and the geography were major obstacles to the formation of prosperous means successful, mercantile, which has to do with business, middle class, such as existed in Italy and other European nations in the early modern period. So this was a problem for Russia in developing that part of society. The countryside was bleak. Okay, that's a tough word, bleak. Anybody that lives in cold areas that have a lot of snow, let's make it really obvious here, like Alaska. Since it is so cold and so gray, it doesn't look positive. It looks very depressing. So that's why it says the countryside was bleak and barren, which means it didn't have a lot of things like trees or good soil, right? It's just barren and most of the time covered in snow. And the weather was often bitterly cold, which is a way of saying, not the taste, they're not talking about the taste, but the pain that it makes you feel in your body. I'll never forget when I first started teaching in Koreatown, my Korean students, I'd ask them if they wanted to go back to Korea, and they would tell me they did not want to go back for the winters because the snow was so cold that they could feel it in their bones. So I didn't quite believe them until I went to Seoul one year, and I know what they're talking about now. So it's the same thing here in Russia. So these factors combined to make travel difficult again, especially at the time. No modern roads, no freeways, no cars, just horses and walking in the snow. You imagine how long that would take? Even the horse would probably run away from you. It's too cold. But travel meant trade, and without frequent travel, which they couldn't, trade did not become an important part of the local economy. Remember that. Nor did Russia enter into trade or cultural exchange with the rest of Europe. That's pretty bad. That's a lot of people you're being cut off from until somewhat later in history. With travel so difficult and the population as wildly scattered as it was, a lot of students I found don't know the word scattered. That means when you either throw something over a large area, or here widely scattered means things are placed very far from each other, right? There's not a heavy concentration like in the center. For example, Los Angeles, as you can see, we have McDonald's scattered widely everywhere. You go a few miles out of the way and there's a McDonald's there, right? So the population was widely scattered as it was. A typical Russian estate provided for all its needs. This contrasted with the economic system in Western Europe, where people either bartered, which means you traded, I'll sell you my shoes for so much money. Oh, you don't want that? Well, okay, we'll lower the price. Or I'll trade you my shoes for a dog or whatever, right? So they either bartered or sold their surplus crops or livestock, meaning cattle, sheep, to obtain necessities and luxuries they could not produce themselves. So that's how they did that, okay? And I guess everybody here knows the difference between a necessity and a luxury, right? Is that correct? A necessity is you need a toilet in your home, but a luxury, unless you're Kim Kardashian, you do not need a gold toilet, right? That's not necessary. Just the toilet itself is necessary, okay? Now we're going to go down to the end of Tartar rule. Prince Dmitry, known to history as Dmitry of the Don. The Don is an area in Russia. It's called the Don. That's where he was from. So, led the Russian army against the Tatars in the Battle of Kulikovo, 1380. So again, if I write this question, I will put the number. I'll say, what happened in 1380? Then you say, oh, George Washington was the first president of the United States. Wrong class, okay? The Russian victory was a major blow against Mongol authority in Russia, which means it was a big defeat against them, or a victory for the Russians, however you look at it. The Khan retained much of his power, but he agreed to recognize Moscow as the central Russian authority and to allow the princes of Moscow to appoint their own successors. So again, like we read earlier, it looks like Mongolia was not really concerned in the actual political runnings of the country, just wanted to make sure that they received their tribute or money. During the mid-1400s, the Khanate, which means the Khan government, lost strength as the Russians gained it. By about 1430, the Great Khanate had broken into four smaller ones, or four smaller government factions. On the Russian side, there was infighting among rival claimants to the throne of Moscow. Infighting has to do here, they're talking about fighting in the family, right? Different princes wanting to become the king of Moscow. And you can have infighting in your work also. There can be infighting at your company. Say you work for Samsung and you have a group of four high-level executives. They all want to be the next VP. Well, they're going to fight amongst themselves to try to get that position. And that's what infighting is. By 1450, Vasily II emerged or came forth as the victor, declaring that only his direct heirs or his sons would rule after him. This was a major step in the process toward unified central rule of Russia. Okay. So I have a little bit more to read here before I put the questions on this page. Okay. Vasily II and his successors carried out a policy of expanding the army by offering land to anyone willing to serve the state in the military. These land grants were made for life, not for 20 years, not for 50 years, but for life. And most of them, another great facet, could be passed on to the landowner's heirs. So if I'm the Russian fellow and they say, hey, you want to join the army, but I'm so poor, all I own are my own shoes, or I don't even have shoes. I'm a peasant. But they say, if I serve in the army, I will be given land. Then I can be a farmer and have my own land. And not only that, if I die or I'm killed in the war, my land could be passed on to my children instead of the government taking it back. So that's a pretty good reason to make people want to go fight, which normally most people don't want to fight in a war. And I don't blame them. So with such a powerful incentive, many men joined the ranks of the army. They included hereditary princes, boyars, and wealthy non-noble families. So even non-noble means the ruling family, but they were wealthy somehow, and they even joined. I guess it was a great way to get land. In Russia, it's a small note here. The title prince does not necessarily refer to the ruler of a province or a member of the royal family. See, so they weren't even part of the royal family. It is a title of the higher nobility, similar to the English titles Duke and Earl. I very rarely hear these terms nowadays. When I was a kid, you still heard the Duke of Windsor and the Duchess and the Earl, but I cannot remember the last time I heard the title Earl. Anyway, peasants and other commoners were required to serve to the community in proportion to the local population. Okay? So again, the main point being stressed here is that you could be born in such a poor family and have nothing, but if you decided to join the army, you would be given land. And if you once signed to you, if you did not make it back from the war, it would be given to your succeeding family. So quite an incentive, quite a good thing. Okay, so now I'm going to go to the questions that'll be for this period. So again, let me make my moves here. Then go to the whiteboard. Okay, again, everybody hanging in there? Are we getting through this? Right, we're doing okay? I hope so. You know, just think of, we're not actually in class for over 3 hours, right? 3.5, 4 hours. We're just having to do it for an hour and a half here. So hopefully you're wearing relaxing clothes, you're having a coffee, you know, no alcohol. You're in class, you're not supposed to have alcohol, okay? So let me get the questions here. Okay, question 8. What were two problems in trying to form a strong Russian middle class? Okay, so if you remember in the reading, they were comparing Russia to Italy and many other Western countries where they didn't have a problem forming a middle class, but there were reasons that made it very difficult in Russia to do this. So hopefully you remember these two reasons. And again, please read the questions. A lot of times my students do not read the questions completely, and they might, like for example, this question 8, they might just answer with one answer, okay? If you look at it, it's problems. So anytime it's a plural noun, it's two or more, but I've already stated only two. So if you only answer one, you're not going to get the full, you're going to get half a point if this becomes a midterm question. Okay. All right, I'm going to jump up to 9. Okay, who led the Russians against the Tartars? So we're talking about the military here, and who led the soldiers in the fight against the Tartars? That's who I'm looking for. Okay, if you can supply this person's name, then you've got the answer for 9. Okay. Okay, next question. Okay, question 10. How did Russia attract men to join the army at this time? Again, any country, anytime throughout history, most people don't want to join an army that's going to obviously be fighting a war. So there has to be some kind of incentive. So uh, Russia used something to attract even the poorest of the poor to join the army and risk their lives. So no funny stuff here. Don't tell me, oh, they offered the men a beautiful wife or they offered them a sports car. Okay, there was no sports cars at the time, right? And you can't assign a woman because a woman can run away before you come back from the war, right? So again, they use something to attract men to join the army and risk their lives for a future of prosperity. Okay. Let me check here. Okay. All right, so that looks like that is my last question for that page. So again, I'll give you a few minutes to, these are a little bit longer, these questions, so I want to make sure you're able to write them on before you complain about the video and say, oh, he rates them so quickly, I don't know, even though I wasn't paying attention. So give you a little more time to copy these. Again, you can answer later. Okay. So hopefully everybody's doing good. We're rounding out to the very last, third of the class. So we've already beat down just a little bit more than an hour, so we're doing well. And the next page will be the last page and the last questions, and then we'll be done for this first week, okay? This first week of Code HUM 101, class title, Civilization of the East, okay? We'll be done with it. So let me activate the old eraser here. I'll start with 8. Goodbye. Okay, 0.29. And then the last one, 10. Okay. All right, so again, this will be the last page. We'll talk about Ivan III again. So if we're all ready, let's go. Ivan III, Grand Prince or Grand Duke of Moscow, married Zoe. There she is again, Zoe. Who knows what she looked like? Was she beautiful? Who knows? Sometimes called Sophia. Paleologos is her last name. Again, something you do not have to remember. Very difficult. Niece of the Byzantine emperor in 1469. Is anybody in my class around in 1469? No? Only me? Okay. Zoe's cultural and family background was to have a major influence on the style of the Russian court. With her arrival, it gained a great deal of ceremony and pomp. So pomp is like, you know, the extra fancy stuff that governments can do, not really important. Ivan and Zoe made the Byzantine double-headed eagle the official emblem of the Russian state. By adopting this symbol, Ivan declared himself the last defender of the Orthodox faith, okay, Christianity. In the wake of the fall of Constantinople to the Turks, who were Muslim, and the failure to unite Orthodox and Roman Catholicism at the Council of Trent. So the Russian Orthodoxy and the Roman Catholicism, which is known to be run by the Pope, they were trying to unify them, but it did not happen. The real beginning of the history of Russia as a nation state, again, we're going that one common one I'd like you to remember, not many, to 1480. When Ivan withheld the annual monetary tribute to the Tartars. Withheld it. We're not going to pay anymore. This led to a confrontation, okay, or battle of the Mongol and the Russian forces on opposite sides of the Oka River. Sounds like one of my students, Oki. A stalemate, which means like a tie or nobody wins, resulted as neither side seemed willing to begin the attack. I guess they were scared to cross the river and attack. They might lose too many men on the way. In the end, the Tartars withdrew, ending the long period of Mongol authority in Russia. So maybe they felt it's just too much trouble to come all the way down here. Then we got to jump over a river. We don't have any type of boats. I guess we can do without the money, right? Okay, so let me continue here. With the Tartars gone, Ivan could assert his authority, or meaning show his power as the supreme ruler of Russia, starting the tradition of autocracy, which means he and only he is in charge, that would continue until the revolution of 1917. Again, students, that's when Lenin took over and for the last Czar of Russia and instituted communism. In 1493, for instance, Ivan forced the kingdom of Lithuania to grant him the title Lord of all Rus, meaning Russia. He also began using the title Czar, a Russian form of Caesar. This had originally been a family name with no secondary meaning. But because the Caesar family ruled Rome for so long, it eventually became synonymous, or meaning the same, as emperor. Symbolically, the use of the imperial title reinforced Ivan's claim that he was descended or came from the Caesars, and that after the fall of Constantinople, the new Rome, Moscow was the third Rome, the center of the world. Officially, however, he remained Grand Prince of Moscow. So again, these were his dreams in the sky of what he wanted and what he called himself, but what his title really was did not change. Partly due to Zoe's cosmopolitan influence, okay, we're not talking about the Cosmopolitan Hotel in Las Vegas. Cosmopolitan means like worldly, or an experience of many cultures, not just your own. Russia experienced a certain degree of cultural exchange with the West during Ivan's reign. So as you see, now they weren't so centrist, and they had some cultural exchange with Western Europe, so they became more cosmopolitan. Ivan established diplomatic relations with Western nations, and an exchange of embassies took place. Russians were curious about Westerners, but also contemptuous. Contemptuous is a big word that can mean scared, worried about, non-trusting. So they also didn't trust Westerners. Why? But also contemptuous of them because they were not Orthodox Christians. So they did not have the same faith, so they didn't trust them, even though they were curious about their culture. Europeans, no doubt, felt similar emotions towards the Russians, whose society seemed to be both more exotic, but also more primitive or basic, low level than their own. Ivan hired several Italian architects and artists, notably Petrus Antonius Solarius, to rebuild the Kremlin, which was the heart of Moscow. Okay. With 4 strikingly beautiful cathedrals, church cathedrals, and the Czar's mansion ranged around a large open plaza, all surrounded by strong, fortified walls. Under Ivan, Russia expanded into an empire more than 3 times the size of the original Grand Principality of Muscovy. Remember, in the beginning, they were just principalities. It was not a unified country. So here it's said that they expanded the empire 3 times larger. Ivan III took control of Novgorod and its territories, which included vast tracts of land to the northeast and northwest of Muscovy. Vasily III, who became emperor on Ivan III's death in 1505, that might be a cool question to ask. Who succeeded Ivan III? Added the Baltic province of Pskov and the province of Ryazan on the Oka River. Access to these bodies of waters was important for trade, since it was much easier at that time to transport quantities of goods by water and overland. Again, you have frozen land, it takes forever. Ruling a larger empire brought with it both advantages and disadvantages. A substantial rise in population meant a larger army. So you get a larger population, you better have a larger army. And greater revenue or greater monetary income from tributes and taxes. But a larger population was more difficult to control and monitor. A larger bureaucracy, or the government workings, paperwork, became necessary in order to take care of the routine of governing at the local level. Because most of the empire was geographically far from Moscow, a great deal of everyday authority remained in the hands of local officials, which of course invited corruption, which is doing things illegally for money, on a large scale since there was no oversight. So it's a little similar to what we have here, like right now. As you know, during the coronavirus pandemic right now, Trump says some things about reopening business and doing things, but yet, like California, for example, our mayor and our governor says completely different things. Oh, maybe we should be shut down longer, or maybe people should just stay home. So the overall authority, goes to Trump, but a lot of times here in this situation, the local authorities have a little more power unless they do something. They are caught with corruption and illegal, then the president can't step in. So kind of similar, just to give you an example. Ancient Rome also had faced the challenge of ruling a large and far-flung. Far-flung means just an empire that went on and on. So, they took most of Europe and they also entered into Egypt and Jerusalem. So they went very far from their home base of Rome. This attempt was successful because the Roman bureaucracy was highly efficient, with clear lines of authority and a chain of command. Such was not the case in Russia. The harsh or hard climate, again because of the snow and ice and blizzards, made travel slow and difficult. The postal service was unreliable, and the local officials were generally free to carry out their responsibilities, parentheses, or not, as they saw fit, without any fear of inspection or reprimand by superiors. Okay. All right, so that's it for the reading. Let me give you the very last questions for the day. I hope you enjoyed the readings and learned some things that you didn't know before and wasn't too difficult for you. So let me proceed. Get away from the reading page. Okay. Let me write my last questions. Okay. Okay. So 11, what did Ivan III make the official emblem of Russia? Right? So the emblem is not a mascot, but it's the symbol of the country. And I think Russia today now has it on their flag after years of the red communist flag with the yellow hammer and sickle. Their new white and light blue flag, they brought the emblem back. So I need to know what was the emblem that he chose to represent Russia. Okay. 12. Sorry about that. I don't want it all caps. Okay, question 12. What did Ivan III force Lithuania to call him? Okay, again, if you've forgotten, Lithuania is not a person's name. Lithuania is the name of a country. And with the power he had over them, he forced them to call him by a special title. So hopefully you can find that in the reading if you don't remember. Okay, move on to the next question. Okay, question 13. Who did Ivan III say he was descended from? If you've forgotten this term, descended, it means who were your ancestors. Usually people in whatever country like to use this term to say they were descended from somebody very famous in the country. I don't hear it anymore. Well, but it was quite popular when I was a boy that people would say things like, I'm descended from George Washington. I'm descended from Abraham Lincoln, right? So usually in any country, people would try to say they're descended from very, very high level important people. So he said he was descended from somebody, from a certain group of people. So please answer that with that answer. So, and the last question for today. Why were Russians suspicious of Westerners? And when I mean Westerners, again, I mean Western Europeans. Again, they were on the eastern side. So why were they suspicious of Westerners? They didn't like their clothes. They didn't like the foods that they eat. What is the key here? Remember, they were also very curious about them and excited about learning their ways. But there was something that they were not quite comfortable with and didn't like about Western European folks. Okay. All right, so again, I'll give you a few minutes to make sure. I've given you 4 long questions here, so I don't want to erase them before you have a time to write them down. So again, put down your cell phones and please write these questions. As soon as you are done writing these questions, I can wrap it up and say that we're done for this first week of class. Okay. Again, for the 3rd time, this is course code HUM 101, class title, Civilization of the East. We meet in the afternoon, 12:30 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. But lucky for us, we're doing it on the computer, switch to YouTube, and we don't have to actually stay in class. I can have Temujin disappear at least 4 times during my lecture, right? So you just have to do it for a shorter time, hour and a half, and we'll be fine. And you can do it from the comfort of your home, right? Right, Tal? Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to start to erase these questions. I'll start from the top to give you a little more time. So let me go to the famous eraser here. Okay, I'm at 11. You ready? What did Ivan III make the official emblem of Russia? Only you know. Okay, 11's gone. 12. What did Ivan III force Lithuania to call him? Again, Lithuania is not a person, not an ex-girlfriend, but a country. He had power over them. 12, bye-bye. 13. Okay. Who did Ivan III say he was descended from? Which group of people that he greatly admired? 13, bye-bye. And 14, why were Russians suspicious of Westerners? Again, was it their style of dress? Was it the food that they ate? Was it their strange dancing techniques? What was it that they were not comfortable with? Okay, I'm now saying goodbye to the last question for the first week. 14. Okay. And so again, you see, I'm still in Jeju-do, and I guess everybody here is in LA. So this was a great wrap up for the first week in this class. I look forward to seeing you next week. Please answer your questions because I'm going to go over the answers next week. I will help you with those, and then we'll be on to our next chapter. Hopefully you enjoy the class. I've enjoyed teaching it. It's a new format, and we'll get through, and everything will be better, and then we'll be back to normal very soon, okay? So if it's during the day, good day to you, which it should be right until 4:30. If not, good night to you, good evening, and I will see you next week. Bye-bye.